As you know, there's been some pretty significant macroeconomic factors that have impacted what we think about work in general. And of course, that has downstream impacts to our seasonal work as well. So I just want to touch on these briefly. I don't think any of these are a surprise to us. Work is changing. In the era of the gig economy, we have these new, highly tech forward organizations that are changing how people go to work. They might take advantage of these types of gig jobs. And those are generally the types of folks that you might be working with as you go to hire your seasonal workers. We also have extremely diverse industries. So when we talk about seasonal work, the average layman might think about, oh, you're hiring a couple extra dozen hands to support your retail store for the holiday season. But I know in the organization I work with here at DPOW, there's a number of different use cases for seasonal labor. You might have seasonal labor for a harvest season, depending on if you're in a farming or agricultural space. You might work for a manufacturer who's producing goods that are specific around certain types of ceremonies like graduation, which is typically a seasonal activity. Seasonal work can just look very different depending on the industry, but what we find is the challenges and the opportunities with seasonal work are really similar industry wide. We also have a global shift in demographics. So the world is getting smaller. It's easier for us to either break down where we work and have a more of a disparate structure, and have more maybe offshore work, or just change how we're reaching our workers. This presents some new challenges and opportunities. And then, of course, the elephant in the room with any of these conversations around work is always COVID-19. We're shifting into a post-COVID world. What does that mean? And how has that affected seasonal work? It's actually given us some superpowers. So we'll talk about those too. First, let's talk about challenges. These you might recognize just from your experience working with seasonal workers. Recruitment overload. Your talent team may or may not be prepared to recruit the workers they need, or maybe they're bringing on too many folks at one time. There's so many challenges to onboarding and ramping up seasonal workers. And so there's definitely a mastery in how you stagger that. Training time constraints. So of course, with any seasonal working strategy, they're not going to walk in the door knowing exactly what they need to do. How do you time that to make the most of those seasonal workers? So you're not paying them to learn, you're paying them for the outcome that you're looking for to achieve the goal that you brought them on. Resource intensive. Even though seasonal workers are supposed to be coming onto your team to actually help your greater team out, they actually cost a lot of resources for your team. Not only, of course, the investment in bringing them on, but also the time and energy of your best experts. Quality control, there's a big risk to bringing on temporary workers. They introduce a lot of opportunity for new ideas and new types of approaches to working. So you want to make sure there's consistency in what they're delivering. Integration with permanent staff. So I touched on the cost of energy and time for your most seasoned experts, but you also want to make sure these temporary workers are integrating well with your permanent staff and that there's a positive culture environment for everyone. High turnover. So this is just kind of goes hand in hand with seasonal workers. These individuals may not be as committed as your permanent staff. So how do you manage that and make sure that it's not hurting your bottom line? You're not investing so much time in them that if they do leave prematurely, it's actually cost you more than it was to bring them on. And then, of course, there's a few last ones I'll touch on briefly. We want to make sure that, if your customer is somebody that these seasonal workers are interacting with directly, or if they're producing a good that your customers will ultimately purchase, that customer is having a consistent experience that they recognize with your brand, that these seasonal workers are scalable. So when we talk about limitations, making sure that the way you're bringing them on, it makes sense and it's profitable for your business. and the uncertain ROI. Seasonal workers, or it's really any new hire, is a gamble. You are gambling on the future. How do we make sure that gamble is more of a certain one for your organization? But we keep doing it. We keep bringing on seasonal workers. We see the value. So clearly there are benefits here. Let's talk through these briefly before we move into our strategy session. So of course, with seasonal work, it offers a lot of flexibility. It helps you meet those demand surges. It also creates a pool of future talent. It's essentially a longer job interview. As you bring on these seasonal workers, you might be identifying people that should become a member of your permanent staff. It also improves your learning and development. As much as it can be hazardous to have new ideas, there's always opportunities to take advantage of those, because there's something about innovation that these temporary hires can bring. It can give you competitive advantage. So you're essentially, introducing the surge of talent into your pool. There's something there that's helping your business, and you're returning to the strategy year in, year out. And then, of course, those diversified skill sets. Maybe you don't need this skill set 365 days of the year, but you need it 30 or 60 days of the year. With the effective seasonal worker approach, it really comes down to that the first 1/5 of their time they're going to spend with you. What are they doing to onboard and ramp up with your organization to become just as impactful as a permanent hire? And we see at DPAL that there's really a few different strategies that you should take in order to make the most of these seasonal hires. And honestly, I think the key theme I see amongst these 9 strategies is training. It's really it's the how of the training, and it's the why of the training. So having a streamlined training approach that focuses on precision. Not only are you training these temporary hires in exactly what they need to know, but making sure that it's an effective learning environment for them. The methodology that you're using to train them is impactful and optimal for their learning development, and it's something they're going to grasp quickly and effectively, but while also maintaining consistency. And I always love to include adaptive learning here, because adaptive learning is really how we train our brains to connect the way that we learn into opportunities that we're not prepared for. But as long as we have those strategies and abilities, it makes it easier for us to know the right step in a new situation. So let's break these down a little further. With streamlined training, it's really about helping your employees work more effectively and efficiently. It's not just about your temporary workers. It's also about managing the time and resources and energy of your best trainers. If they are spending several weeks every year just working on training temporary workers, they are being taken away from their responsibilities. How do we make sure that we're not taking that time away from them? Employees who are trained with precision are less likely to make mistakes. They're more likely to do the things that you need them to do in that moment. Optimal training methods. So what we have found with our clients is that effective training has incredibly positive outcomes for those organizations, whether it's increased sales, improved customer satisfaction, or reducing operational costs. We can see and tie a direct line from training to outcomes. I spent some time on adaptive learning, so I won't stress it so hard here, but it really is about creating that effective problem-solving environment. And then, of course, uniformity in training methods is key, because you want to make sure that each wave of temporary workers is trained in the same way, so they will have consistency in the product that you're producing. And then we go back to, what's the why of all of this training? Well, it's because the outcomes matter. And we see that with the clients we work with. These outcomes are really key to not only the safety of your employees and staff, but also the safety of your customers. And the safety of your brand. It's important to consider your brand reputation with every hire, particularly seasonal hires. When there's an introduction of risk, you want to make sure that the training that you're prioritizing is focused on protecting that brand reputation. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we're not spending so much time and energy on training that we're able to still accelerate that skill maturation and build confidence in the process. So building confidence not only in the employees you're training, but the employees who are conducting these activities. This is how we really see all of this come full circle for true impactful training experiences. I'd like to, now that we've talked about the why and the what, let's talk about the how. So preparing for the busy season, whether your busy season is Q4, it's Q3, it's a harvest season, it's a cyclical, couple of weeks every quarter, whatever that busy season looks like, there are several key strategies that you can use to make the most of those. But I really want to focus on 4, which I think is great because these are 4 that you can walk away from. So take out a piece of paper and jot these down. Really, it's about building tailored training. A lot of training platforms want to offer canned training. They want to give you, whether it's a manual or a video, it's a very simple, generic approach. But what we realize is you need to focus on what your organization needs, because those things are very specific to you. It could be regarding safety or company culture. It could be job specific, but it's truly impactful to have tailored training for your organization. You don't need to wait for the busy season to get started. When I talked about staggering earlier, maybe you're hiring waves of seasonal workers. When you know how long your training takes, it's easy to start building out a series of training and onboarding plans to help those new hires start and get to work quickly. Focus on clear and relevant training materials. Are your training materials engaging? Do they help these temporary workers understand what their responsibilities are? These temporary workers are walking into a space that they may have never been before. They may have no experience in the industry that you're working in or the types of materials that they're expected to become comfortable with. Having engaging training could be a key differentiator in whether or not that particular seasonal worker will be successful. And then maybe you haven't captured your training processes. Maybe this is just something that you haven't had to do before. The need hasn't been there, or you haven't recognized that need. That's okay. You don't have to wait until next year to start building this training. If your busy season is right now or next week, take advantage of that time and start capturing those processes at the peak. That's something where one of your trainers can help you during that time. Actually do it live on the floor while you're working. Just, it really just depends on the methods that you use to capture that training. Now, what does this look like with DPOW? If you're working on preparing for your busy season, everything I've discussed, you can do with a tool, without a tool. But let me tell you why it gets easier when you use DPOW. So we talked about building tailored training. With DPOW, our focus is on providing you a software tool that leverages the tools you already have in your pocket. It's not about having to invest in expensive hardware. It's about using the tools that every member of your team already has, which is typically a smartphone. Start training before the peak. So we talked about this and what that could look like. If your training is cloud-based, it's really easy to train new workers. They can train before they even travel to the site, especially if this is something that is hosted in the cloud, similar to DPOW. We talked about focusing on engaging training materials. Our focus at DPOW is video. So if you've never learned with video, it's truly the way that people learn best in the 21st century. Think about the last time your sink broke or you had to fix a tire. You probably got on YouTube and looked up a video and tried to find a sink that looked similar to yours to start troubleshooting the problems. DPAL is really about finding the natural tendencies that people have and providing those tools to help them in the workplace to connect the way they naturally want to learn with the way they need to learn for their role. And then we talked about capturing processes during the busy seasons and what that could look like. With DPAL, it's so easy. You don't even have to shut down. You can simply have your trainer or whomever you want to responsible to do this to pull up the DPAL capture app on their smartphone and start recording while you're in the process of producing whatever it is that your organization produces. I know this sounds a little abstract, so I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Corey to talk more specifically about what is DPAL and why it's something you should consider investing in.
Perfect. Thank you, Courtney. I'm excited to tell you all about the platform. My plan for the next 15 minutes or so is to talk high level about what the DPAL process looks like, and then we'll just go into the platform and walk through some of those features. But before we do, I think it's a good idea to kind of talk about traditional training methods and why there's something different from DPAL. So with any sort of training content, Courtney kind of touched on this as well, but video training is the way that people learn now. Even prior to the pandemic, YouTube was a great learning platform. Written material, even with pictures, can often be difficult to pass along certain nuance. So with video content, it takes away one of those barriers of learning. But it also helps to set proper expectations. We have a wonderful case study from one of our longtime partners where they greatly reduced the amount of turnover at their company because they were able to provide video content to their new hires and say, this is the environment you're walking into. Is this an environment that you feel comfortable with? And so with that, those new seasonal workers would have more of an opportunity to say, okay, I know exactly what sort of environment I can expect. With in-person training, whether it's job shadowing or classroom instruction, it's a great way to pass along information, assuming that those experts, are really top-notch in what they're doing, but it's difficult to scale. With job shadowing, hard for more than just a couple of people to adequately learn, especially if the tasks are fairly small. And then in a classroom environment, with a variety of different backgrounds of learning, a variety of different styles of learning, it's really difficult to make sure everyone's really keeping that same pace. And again, these are all things that we have to expedite that learning process because those seasonal hires are there for such a short time. And then with regular video solutions, it's difficult. It takes a long time to create content, especially if you are pulling together a packet of different platforms that can accomplish everything DPAL can accomplish in that single editing platform. Also, as Courtney mentioned, it's really valuable to create that training content ahead of the peak so that you can really get your employees, especially your seasonal employees, up to speed in a highly scalable way. Courtney, if you want to switch to the next slide. So this is the DPAL process end to end. And again, after this, we'll go over to the platform. You'll see a lot of this in real time. But as Courtney had mentioned, DPAL allows you to really capture that tailored content exactly the way your company's doing a process on the machine in which that process is happening, in the environment in which that's happening. We allow you to capture that video content without any interruption to anything that's happening on the floor, any of those processes. Once you have that video content, it moves over to our platform, and that's where the AI comes in and really helps to expedite that creation process. So our AI's name is Stephanie. The first thing Stephanie's going to do is she's going to go through and transcribe your entire video. If you have a global organization or a multilingual organization, she can currently understand somewhere around 25 languages on that front end. So regardless of who that exceptional employee is or who that subject matter expert is, she's going to be able to transcribe that entire video. Then she goes through and she creates a step-by-step. It goes further than saying, okay, this is where step 2 ends and where step 3 starts. It actually takes that video and breaks it up into modules. You can think of it a little bit like Legos. But the benefit there is once you have that library, it's so easy to keep content updated rather than re-recording an entire process. You can just update certain steps. You can reorder different components, or you can resequence those to create different types of workflows. So once you have that library of content populated, it's really easy just to keep that updated and keep that current. On the back end, she can then translate that video into somewhere around 45 languages now. So again, if you have multi-languages or multiple languages spoken within your organization, we're looking for ways to expedite that training. So taking away that language barrier is just going to help people learn that much deeper and that much faster. Once you publish a video, there's various ways that you can distribute that out. We do have an app, so people can pull their phone right out of their pocket, not only learn there, but also remind themselves there. You can print QR codes, someone can scan it, it'll take them right to that training video. You can host in other platforms.